Newsshooter coverage of Cine Gear 2023 is sponsored by B&H and Atlas Lens Co.
Hi, it's Matt here for Newsshooter.com, and we're at the Atlas Lens Co. headquarters out in Glendale, California now to talk to you about the Atlas story. Because probably a lot of people are not familiar with this. Like, how did everything originally start?
That's a deep question, Matt. First of all, thanks for coming down to Atlas HQ. So Atlas is born of passion for anamorphic lenses and cinematography, co-founded by myself and Forrest Schultz. And we first began work in 2016 on making prototypes of what would become the Orion series lenses. But the story goes back further. So I always like to sort of start with the why. And for me, the reason why I was interested in anamorphic lenses is that around 2001 or 2002, I saw the film Punch Drunk Love by Paul Thomas Anderson with the fantastic work of Robert Elswit, ASC. And when I saw that film, I was inspired and I had a lot of questions. Why does this movie make me remember many of my favorite films from growing up? Films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or films like Blade Runner, films like Empire Strikes Back. And I realized that it's partly the visual language, even though the visual language of the film is distinct from those other films. Part of the lensing actually was a character in the movie. And so I began researching the rabbit hole. Well, why is the lens in this film a character? What are these streak flares? Why is the bokeh oval shaped? And I came to find out that Punch Drunk Love was filmed with Panavision C-Series anamorphic lenses. And I realized, okay, that's a connection that ties this film to a lot of my favorite films from my youth. They were all filmed with anamorphic lenses. So I realized that, not only is it the fantastic work of these cinematographers and all of the beautiful art direction and acting and everything that goes into a movie that makes the film special, it's also the lens through which the image travels. And in this case, Panavision anamorphic lenses are what influenced a lot of the aspects of what I like about the way a film looks. So I thought, well, how can I make a film, and I didn't have access to even a movie camera at that time, how can I make images that make me feel the way that this film makes me feel? So I had a Minolta stills camera that I would take pictures of my friends with, and I went to work figuring out how I could get an anamorphic lens attached to my stills camera to make cinematic portraits of my friends. And I did some research. I found out you can't really buy any anamorphic lens for a stills camera, but I found a couple things along the way, things like an Isco-Rama attachment, which those were recently reintroduced by Schneider. Good job, Schneider, that's really exciting. And then I also found projector lenses on eBay, and those were more in a price range that I could afford because people were decommissioning projector lenses from theaters that were showing film and moving into digital projection. And so there were on the secondhand market a lot of vintage anamorphic projector lenses. So I thought, well, maybe I can hack this projector lens onto my Minolta stills camera, take pictures, and then in Photoshop, after scanning the negatives, de-squeeze the picture out to make a cinematic CinemaScope aspect ratio photo. And it turned out it worked pretty well. So I managed to make some really cool portraits of my friends and put that on the back burner of life and continued with my career in cinematography.
And then you got into wireless video.
Yeah, exactly. So my career, starting as a lighting technician at that time when I was experimenting with those projector lenses, my trajectory went from being a lighting technician to a digital imaging technician to being a burgeoning cinematographer, learning from some of the best in the industry. And I started shooting with DSLR cameras, which had only then started recording video. And so clients would often ask me, is there a way that we can see the picture that you're filming with this HD video camera wirelessly? And I was like, actually no. But it would be nice if we could, because I was shooting a lot of content for companies like Makeup Forever in New York City, and different tech companies like Facebook, Google, and they'd always want to see the picture that we were shooting with a DSLR camera in HD. There was no great way to do that, so I looked at consumer technologies that were available in the marketplace, and a company called Amimon was making chips for consumer technology to allow you to have a Blu-ray player stream across the living room to your TV. So I figured out how to get in touch with them. They ignored me, but I was very persistent. So that's the theme of the story here, is persistence. And I'll encourage anyone out there that you can win by attrition. If you believe in what you're doing, just stick to it, and eventually you'll get somewhere. So I just was very persistent, kept pushing, and eventually I managed to land a deal where I could license the chips that are used in that to make a product for the film industry at an affordable price point, and that's what became Paralinx. So from 2010 to 2012, I worked on developing that, and in 2015, my team and I sold Paralinx to the Vitek Group, which also owned Teradek. So we'd managed to take a really nice part of the market share by being made by cinematographers for cinematographers, and service and focus on camera people was always our biggest priority. So we made great products, but focused on the people first and foremost. So after selling Paralinx, I was like, what do I really want to do? So I thought back to my early days experimenting with those projector lenses. And at that time, back in 2001 or so, a Lomo anamorphic lens was $500. And I thought, $500? I'll never have $500 to spend on a lens. Flash forward, it's 2015, and you couldn't buy a Lomo lens for less than $10,000. And I'm talking about one that's broken. So I was kind of discouraged, but then I was like, well, I sold this company, I have a little bit of money. Some people would go out and buy a Porsche, but what my Porsche would be a fantastic anamorphic lens, because cinematography is my heart and soul. So I went shopping and I said, oh, okay, there's these other great anamorphic lenses from huge companies that have been doing it for 100 years, but they're like $30,000 a lens, and for 30 grand a lens, they don't really do the kind of image that I like, that reminded me of films like Punch Drunk Love or films like Blade Runner. And of course, part of that is that you can't really buy a Panavision lens. They're only for rental. But even beyond that, high-end cinematography lenses were very expensive, but not doing the type of anamorphic imaging that I loved. So I thought, well, what if we took this money, and my co-founder Forrest and I put together a team, and we made prototypes of what we think the best anamorphic lens would be, that would be accessible for people like us. So we set to work.
That must have been a big risk at the time.
It was a big risk, but I'm not too afraid of risk. And we thankfully met a really influential and brilliant part of our team today, who's Scott DeWald, who's our chief optical engineer. And he had trained under some of the German optical masters like Udo Schaus, and he'd at one time been technical VP of Schneider Optics and been a part of the projection revolution for a digital cinema projection. So he had really good firsthand knowledge of the best way to design an anamorphic lens, practical ways to approach a supply chain and manage a supply chain. And I built a pretty decent knowledge of how to run a company and how to build a supply chain and make a product from Paralinx. So that was really my business school. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity, and also grateful to the Vitek Group for buying out Paralinx and enabling me to start this venture with Forrest and Scott. And so we're here in this fantastic, building in Glendale now, making the lenses of my dreams. And
did you ever think you'd be here now, looking back at the time when you first came up with that idea?
Never. I mean, I think if you asked me in 2001, would you ever be able to start a lens company or make lenses, I would say that's insanely impossible. And I think in 2015, I just thought, well, if we make something that we believe in, at the bare minimum, we'll have something that we like. And if other people don't like it, as long as we like it, that'll make us happy. But we were so fortunate to have other people believe in us and really love and enjoy the product. And I think the message for us has always been to empower people to make images that they believe in the way that they want to. So, our motto is the world of cinematography in your hands, and that's to put the power of anamorphic imaging in your hands, or your hands. So really, it's not just for us, it's for everyone, hopefully. And it's been a wild ride. I mean, we launched with the Orion series with 3 lenses, and the reason we had 3 only is that was sort of what we thought of as a minimum viable plan to start, because if you look at Lomo lenses, the common set would be like a 35, 50, and 85. But there were some outliers there was an 80 sometimes, and sometimes people would have a 40. And we thought, well, the rare ones in that set, you can't really get a 40 Lomo. So if we make a 40, if people own Lomos, this won't be really a threat to them. They'll add it to their set of Lomos. Or if you're someone with a Koa anamorphic set, making a 40 that has less extreme distortion and fishbowl effect will enable you to use the 40. So you could use a 40 Atlas and then use your 50 Koa and be totally happy. So our minimum viable plan was to come up with 3 focal lengths that we thought would be well mixed with other sets, but also great on their own. So we had the 40, the 65, and the 100, and that's what we call the A set. And in retrospect, it's interesting because we just named it the A set knowing that we were going to make a group B, but there's no difference really between A and B set of Orion. It's one family of lenses, but it was a way of delineating that this is a package and this is a package, and that's future planning, but not that they're any different as a product. But it's been really fascinating to watch the uptake of the way people adopt those sets as packs. So I think in some ways it's influenced the way that people even make lens choices in terms of figuring out what to either buy or rent. So people will rent them as an A set or a B set. Even if you're not really constrained by just having 3, people will pick a 3-pack on their own. And then recently, my friend Rick Darge, we named a sort of unofficial set called the D set after a D for Darge, which is a 25 mil, a 40 mil, and an 80 mil. So it's like a totally different group. So that's a fun group of 3 if you can only have 3.
And you've got the Mercury series now. I mean, looking ahead, what's possibly the next step for Atlas? Because the market's becoming more and more crowded. We're obviously seeing a trend. I mean, you guys led it, and now we're seeing a lot of anamorphic lenses coming to market. What's Atlas going to do going forward? What's
next? So I think the first thing to do next is begin shipping Mercury lenses. So the first group, we call it Group 1. So we're just trying a different paradigm in terms of framing for the Mercury series. So Group 1 consists of a 36 millimeter, 42 millimeter, and 72 millimeter. And the Mercury are 1.5 squeeze anamorphic as opposed to a traditional 2x squeeze with something like an Orion series. So in many ways, these are traditional lenses made to cover traditional film formats. It's designed for a 4-perf piece of film, which is the same size as an Alexa open gate. And that was really our kind of design focus for the first 3 Orions and the next 3 Orions and beyond. So the family of Orions are designed around 4-perf film, but they work great on all digital sensors. The Mercury are for a new generation of filmmakers using full-frame cameras that might only have a 16:9 recording mode. And so with a 1.5 squeeze, you get the same delivery aspect ratio for a traditional cinemascope, but you also have the ability, if you have a sensor that's unconstrained, to deliver, like if you have a 3x2 sensor, you can deliver Netflix 2:1 very easily and get more pixels out of your sensor. So you really get a diverse opportunity for format deliveries across both the Orion and the Mercury series. So the next thing for us is delivering Mercury series a little bit later this year, the first 3, Group 1. The next group of 3 in the Mercury series are the 54 mil, the 95 mil, and the 138 mil. And a big question we get is, why did you pick these focal lengths? And there's a really nice narrative. So the origin of the first Mercury lens that we designed, it optimized really well around 42 millimeters exactly. So we said, well, what's the meaning of life? Like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, 42. And then I find this number appearing in my life all the time. So if I go to In-N-Out Burger down the street and I order lunch, it'll be a 42, always. So it's kind of a very strange coincidence, but I like to lean into weird coincidences like that. But the focal lengths actually nest really well within each other. So if you're using the 1.5 coefficient as a baseline, the anamorphic squeeze, the 36 becomes a 24 horizontally, the 42 becomes a 28 horizontally, and the 72 is right around a 50 horizontally. So you have a nice wide set. Even if you're using a Super 35 camera, that's a pretty wide angle for a basis of 3 lenses. And they have a golden ratio as you go up through the focal length numbers that makes them really nice on both Super 35 formats and full frame. So as you cascade up in focal length, the sizes just feel natural. So you can go from one focal length on one camera system to the next focal length on a full frame camera, and you're like, oh, these really work well together. So it's really meant to be a harmonious system for framing. But there's also an embedded homage to a precursor in terms of 1.5 anamorphics, the ISCO system. So the ISCO-RAMA attachments, they had model numbers, ISCO 36, ISCO 42, and ISCO 54. So coincidentally, those are also focal lengths that, they're not focal lengths for ISCO-RAMA, but they are focal lengths for Mercury, and it works really well as a system. So there's something magical about that.
And you're starting to do a little bit of customization work here now, like for various clients in terms of customizing anamorphic lenses. Is that something you're looking to do more of going forward, or is that a...
It's something we're really excited about. So I imagine you might be referring to the custom set of Orion lenses that we built for Linus Sandgren, FSF ASC, for the film Babylon. Linus also chose a standard set of Orions for the film Don't Look Up, so we feel really fortunate. They always say don't meet your heroes, but you know, if we look at sort of our cinematography heroes, I'm really excited and proud to say that some of my personal heroes in cinematography are using our lenses now, and that's just sort of mind-blowing. People like Greg Fraser, people like Oren Soffer, people like Gareth Edwards. I like to unofficially say that the Mercury lens is the Gareth Edwards lens, because a couple years ago we were fortunate enough to meet Gareth after we introduced the Orions, and he told us he was prepping for a movie. He couldn't tell us much about it, but that he wanted to work with a lot of non-actors in very small spaces and be very mobile and portable. And we're like, well, you know, a 32 Orion is pretty small and pretty light compared to anything else out there in the market. And he's like, no, that's not small enough, it's not light enough, I need it to be tiny. And so his kind of requirements for his project helped define what our goals were in terms of productization for the Mercury series lenses. And so we're really grateful for him kind of pushing the boundaries. And what's fascinating about the Mercury series is that they're a unique patent pending technology that is really the brainchild of some things that Forrest was experimenting with at the very early days of Atlas on his kitchen table. So there's a couple different ways to focus an anamorphic lens. There's a synchro method, which is what Kowa anamorphics and Lomo square fronts use, where you're focusing prime block and you're moving the anamorphic group synchronized in conjunction with each other. And the second order consequence of that is, you know, when you get into close-up, people's heads tend to warp out because you lose anamorphic squeeze. There's the Newcomer method, which is patented in 1931, where you have a variable diopter group somewhere in the lens, typically in the front, that will have a collimated lens behind it, collimated anamorphic group, and then a focusing group. And that's the basis for how Orions work. And also many other fantastic historical lenses also use that method. There's the Panavision method, where you have a set of twisting cylinders that help with astigmatism and help get close focus without losing the anamorphic compression ratio in close focus. And that's patented around 1954 and also very unique and beautiful. And we've introduced what I would consider one of the most interesting and novel architectures in an anamorphic lens in the last 70 years. And that's unique to the Mercury series based on some of Forrest and Scott's research. And so this is really the first time that you've seen an anamorphic lens that works the way that this does, as small as it does, and provides the image quality that it does. So I'm really proud that we've changed anamorphic history with these lenses. And you're going to see other lenses from us that have similar architectural concepts and design. So that's a really interesting aspect of the optical design. Did I go off topic? Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit, but it's okay. Going forward too, any thought about doing anamorphic zooms?
That's definitely in the roadmap. Oh, and coming back to your question. So originally Matt was asking about custom lenses. So we're working on a project that we call Atlas Alchemy, whereby we'll be able to customize a certain number of lenses for certain clients, following sort of a pre-fee menu where you can look at some tunings that we've come up with see what you like, see what you don't like, and then select from that menu. And then if there's something off menu that you find that we can't satisfy, there's ways to have a conversation in which we can try to embrace your creative and artistic goals. So, lens customization can be both fantastic but also terribly frightening, because you could end up going down a rabbit hole that leaves you nowhere and everywhere all at once, right? And so I think our goal is to help people that are looking for a very specific look in the right way. We were fortunate enough to work with Linus, and there's other cinematographers and organizations out there that will hopefully take advantage of the unique opportunities that we offer here at Atlas.
And, any thinking about going down the route of coming up with some specialized tune lenses just for rental only?
It's possible. It's a big rabbit hole to dig. We did come out with the Orion series Silver Edition lenses, which were something of a take on that concept, where we made 100 limited edition run sets that flare more. They have a unique neutral flare due to the type of coating that we designed, and those are only available as a 6-lens set. We've since introduced new focal lengths of Orion series since the Silver Edition. So we have a 21 mm Orion and a 25 mm Orion. The 21 is the world's widest angle production front anamorphic lens, and we've introduced Silver Edition 21 and 25 as well. So those are sold as singles, and we've actually opened up the ability to purchase Silver Edition lenses as singles if you wish to as well. So that's a unique opportunity, and that's a way of having something that's limited edition, fairly semi-custom compared to the regular Orions. It's still a really unique offering. It has different through focus characteristic, which is something that people often refer to as 3D pop in a lens. That's a very hard thing to market, but it has to do with the quality of focus from best point of focus to the foreground and best point of focus to the background. So Orions have a 50-50 split of through focus, and the Silver Edition have about a 65-35. So 65% holding past the best point of focus, 35% in the foreground. And that's something you can see in classic lenses like Bosch and Lone Baltars.
And just back to my final question,
Sure.
Anamorphic zooms?
Definitely, that's something that we're looking at. Yeah, it's we've never built a zoom lens yet, but it's certainly a priority for us because we think it's a really nice territory to be in. If you look back historically, there are some really interesting anamorphic zooms that made some of the fantastic films of the French New Wave, notably the Brevet Suprematic, which is built on an Ingenue 35-140. And it has a unique anamorphic group in the front. Some people call the system Franscope, although it doesn't say Franscope on any of the lenses. But we actually have a Franscope 35-140 here in the Anamorphic History Museum at our Glendale, California headquarters. So if you stop in, we'd love to show you that particular lens. And in some ways, that lens is an inspiration for the type of image you can get from a Mercury lens. So it's a really neat historical specimen.